Right now, across 3 states in the northeastern United States, cleanup crews are still cutting downed trees off roads and clearing power lines from a storm that meteorologists rated as only the second event of its kind this region has seen in 2 years. In Shoreham, Vermont, a couple asleep in their bedroom watched a tree branch crash directly through their window, seconds after a bolt of lightning struck just outside, and had only enough time to grab each other and jump clear of the flying glass before it landed on top of them. At a campground on Lake Bomoseen, a falling tree crushed straight through several camper trailers, forcing families to abandon their sites and sleep in their cars in a parking lot instead, just to stay away from the trees. Across Vermont, New York, and New Hampshire, thousands of homes lost power. Interstate 91 was blocked in both directions by fallen trees. A tree came down on top of a house in Hillsborough County, and 2 separate Red Cross shelters had to open their doors in the middle of the night. That is what this storm looked like on the ground. On the radar, it looked like something else entirely, a wall of bright, almost neon green sweeping across 3 state lines at once, the exact color signature meteorologists associate with the most dangerous kind of severe thunderstorm there is, the kind capable of very large hail and wind gusts that can outrun a hurricane. The Storm Prediction Center rated this event an enhanced risk, a level 3 out of 5 on its severe weather scale, a rating this particular corner of New England typically only sees once every 1 to 2 years. No hype, no exaggeration, just what the data from the National Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center actually shows about why this storm turned dangerous, why weather maps turn that toxic shade of green in the first place, and why forecasters are already watching for the next one before this one has even finished being cleaned up. If a storm like this has rolled through where you live this summer, drop a comment and tell me what it looked like on your radar. I read every one of these. If you want grounded storm coverage instead of panic headlines, subscribe. It is free, and a like helps this reach people who need to see it before the next warning goes out. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Thank you. Now, let us get into it. Let us start with the color itself, because it is the detail everybody notices first, and almost nobody actually understands. A normal storm cloud looks blue-gray or charcoal, not because the water inside it has any colo, but because of how sunlight scatters and gets absorbed on its way through. Inside an especially large, especially strong thunderstorm, something different happens. The cloud grows thick enough to block most direct sunlight from above, so the only light reaching your eyes from underneath the cloud has traveled a long, slanted path through the atmosphere first. Along that path, 2 things happen to the light at the same time. Short wavelengths, the blues, get scattered away by air molecules through a process called Rayleigh scattering, the same basic mechanism that makes a clear sky blue in the first place. Long wavelengths, the reds, get absorbed by the sheer volume of water and ice suspended inside a storm that is carrying an unusually large amount of moisture, including hail actively growing inside its updraft. Strip away the blue on one end and the red on the other, and what your eyes are left seeing is whatever sits in the middle of the visible spectrum. Green. Meteorologists have documented this phenomenon for decades, and while a green sky does not automatically mean a tornado is coming, it is a reliable signal that the storm above you is unusually large, unusually wet, and very likely carrying hail, which is exactly the combination the Storm Prediction Center was watching for across the Northeast this week. This is not a new discovery. Storm chasers and meteorologists have been documenting and photographing green skies for at least half a century, and one of the most famous examples in American weather history happened on a July morning back in 1980, when a massive derecho tore across the Great Lakes region with wind gusts near 100 miles per hour. Witnesses that day described the sky turning what they called a dark pea green, so dark that streetlights automatically flicked on in the middle of the morning, decades before anyone had a smartphone in their pocket to photograph it. The optics have not changed since then. What has changed is how quickly a photo of a green sky can travel from one person's phone to millions of screens within minutes, which is part of why a storm like this one gets attention far beyond the specific towns it actually passed through. The setup itself had been building for days before anyone saw a drop of rain. A cold front pushing down out of Quebec was set to collide with a warm, unstable air mass sitting over northern New England, and forecasters had flagged the collision zone almost 48 hours in advance. By Tuesday afternoon, the National Weather Service had issued a severe thunderstorm watch covering northern and central Vermont, New York's North Country, and northern New Hampshire, warning specifically of damaging wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour, hail up to 2 inches in diameter, frequent lightning, and torrential. Downpours with a tornado or 2 considered possible, though not guaranteed. The Storm Prediction Center's own outlook that day went further, describing an active and potentially impactful severe weather event capable of producing isolated wind gusts over 75 miles per hour, large to very large hail, and tornadoes, including some rated strong. That combination of hazards is what pushed this event up to an enhanced risk, a level 3 out of 5 on the Storm Prediction Center's 5-level scale. And local meteorologists were blunt about what that actually meant in practice, noting that this particular region typically only sees an enhanced risk rating once every 1 to 2 years, with the last comparable rating in that same corner of New England having come almost exactly 2 years earlier, on July the 16th of 2024. The storms arrived almost exactly on schedule. Around 5 to 6 in the evening, the first line moved across the Vermont and New Hampshire border, dropping hail measuring about 1 inch in diameter and uprooting large trees in Essex County, Vermont. A second, more organized line followed a similar path a bit later, tracking southeast out of St. Lawrence County, New York, and into Vermont, leaving a trail of damage through Shoreham, Orwell, Brandon, and Pittsford, where fallen trees and power lines blocked Route 7 until crews could clear at least one lane. That same line continued southeast into New Hampshire, where a tree came down on Interstate 91 northbound, blocking both lanes before crews reopened it later that night, and where, in Hillsborough County, another tree took down power lines and landed directly on a house. Vermont utility companies reported thousands of customers without power by the following morning, concentrated heavily in Addison and Rutland counties, with additional outages scattered through the Northeast Kingdom. In the town of Coventry alone, more than 700 customers remained without power well into the night, and a separate cluster of more than 6,000 customers around St. Johnsbury lost power before crews were able to restore it hours later. 2 Red Cross shelters opened as a precaution, one in Newport, Vermont, and another in Haverhill, New Hampshire. Though officials reported no injuries from the storm itself, a genuinely fortunate outcome given how close some of these encounters came to being much worse. The family in Shoreham, whose bedroom window blew inward under a falling branch, walked away with only a few scratches on their arms from the broken glass. The campground at Lake Bomoseen reported nobody hurt, despite a tree crashing through multiple occupied trailers, largely because campers had already moved themselves and their children into their cars once the wind picked up. While the Northeast was dealing with its own severe weather, an entirely separate but comparably dangerous storm system was unfolding more than 1,500 miles away in Montana, underscoring just how widespread this particular stretch of unsettled weather has been across the country. Storm Prediction Center forecasters issued a mesoscale discussion covering central and eastern Montana, warning of a most probable peak wind gust between 65 and 80 miles per hour, alongside hail as large as 2.5 inches in diameter, driven by a potent mid-level jet and steep lapse rates that allowed thunderstorms to grow upscale into an organized, damaging cluster through the evening hours. That Montana event carried its own version of the same visual signature meteorologists watch for, an intense, tightly packed radar core capable of producing the same eerie green cast in the sky beneath it, for exactly the same optical reasons described earlier. Extreme moisture and ice content packed into a single, violent updraft. Forecasters specifically flagged the risk of upscale growth, meaning individual thunderstorm cells were expected to merge into one long, organized line as they moved east across the state. The same basic process that produces a derecho if it sustains itself over a long enough distance. Meteorologists tracking the system noted mid-level lapse rates steep enough and enough instability built up. Beneath the storm's cold pool, that isolated gusts approaching 80 miles per hour could not be ruled out even before the line fully organized, a warning that put emergency managers across several rural Montana counties on alert well before the first storm cell had even matured. This is not an isolated week of bad luck, and it is worth being direct about that, rather than treating each of these storms as its own unconnected event. The same broader weather pattern responsible for the Northeast's enhanced risk event and Montana's damaging wind and hail threat has also been driving a genuinely serious flash flood risk over Texas, where the Weather Prediction Center placed the Texas Hill Country, the central Rio Grande Valley, and the Edwards Plateau under a high risk of excessive rainfall, its highest category, with rainfall rates of 2 to 3 inches per hour reported from thunderstorms, tapping into precipitable water values exceeding 2 inches. A separate moderate risk was added for southern Arizona for the same reason, as monsoon moisture surging north out of Mexico met an atmosphere primed to wring nearly all of it out at once. Meanwhile, wildfire smoke drifting south out of Canada has been thick enough to trigger air quality alerts across Michigan and parts of Colorado, and even measurably, cooler temperatures across Vermont, where meteorologists noted the smoke was blocking enough solar radiation to keep afternoon highs 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit below what they otherwise would have been. Layer all of that together, a violent, severe weather corridor stretching from Montana through the Great Lakes and into New England, a historic flash flood threat over Texas and Arizona, and a blanket of Canadian wildfire smoke drifting over the upper Midwest. And you get a country that has had essentially no quiet corner of weather this week. The reason all of this is happening at once traces back to the same broad atmospheric pattern meteorologists have been tracking across the entire summer, a slow-moving ridge of high pressure sitting over the western United States, paired with a deep trough parked over eastern Canada. That ridge and trough combination forces the jet stream into a wavy, elongated path rather than a fast, straight one, and every disturbance riding along that wave, each individual shortwave trough embedded within the larger pattern, ends up tracking through almost exactly the same corridor across the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes and the Northeast, one after another, rather than spreading out across the country the way they normally would in a faster-moving pattern. Forecasters were already flagging days in advance that another shortwave trough would move across the Great Lakes and Northeast by the coming weekend, with a second wave following close behind early the following week, meaning the same general corridor that just took a direct hit is very likely to see additional rounds of severe weather again within days. The genuinely important lesson buried inside this particular storm, the same lesson that shows up again and again across severe weather events, is how much of a difference advance warning made to the actual outcome. A severe thunderstorm watch had been issued roughly 12 hours before the worst of the damage occurred, giving campers at Lake Bomoseen enough time to move themselves and children into their vehicles before a tree came down on their trailers, giving emergency officials enough time to have Red Cross shelters staffed and ready before anyone actually needed one, and giving residents across 3 states enough notice to charge their phones and keep their severe weather notifications turned on overnight, which is precisely why local meteorologists were pushing that specific piece of advice so heavily beforehand. Despite trees landing on a house, a window blowing in on a sleeping couple, and a trailer being crushed with people still nearby, the region came out of an enhanced risk severe weather event, one of the more dangerous ratings the Storm Prediction Center issues, with no injuries reported at all. That is not luck. That is what advance warning taken seriously actually produces. So, what does all of this mean for you, watching this wherever the next green sky happens to be? A green-tinted sky is not on its own a guarantee of a tornado, and it does not mean you should run outside with a camera to get a better look, however tempting that instinct is. It means you are looking at a storm carrying an unusually large volume of water and ice, which in practice means large hail and damaging wind are either already happening or about to happen very nearby, and that shelter, not sightseeing, is the correct response. If a severe thunderstorm watch has already been issued for your area, as it had been for a full 12 hours before this particular storm's worst damage occurred, that is the window to charge your devices, confirm your phone's emergency alerts are turned on, and think through where you would actually go if a warning was issued overnight while you were asleep, since that is exactly when the storm did its worst damage. If you're camping, as the families at Lake Bomoseen were, that means having a plan. To get into a hard-sided vehicle the moment thunder becomes audible, rather than waiting to see how bad a storm actually gets from inside a tent or a trailer. And if you are indoors when a warning is issued, the safest place remains an interior room on the lowest level of the building, away from windows, since it was a window, not a wall, that failed in Shoreham. None of this requires panic. It requires treating a watch as an actual instruction to prepare, not as background noise. The honest, grounded summary of this storm is this: a cold front dropping out of Quebec collided with warm, unstable air over northern New England on Tuesday, producing a severe thunderstorm event. The Storm Prediction Center rated an enhanced risk, a level this particular region typically only experiences once every 1 to 2 years, with damaging wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour, hail up to 2 inches in diameter. And the same distinctive green sky signature scientists have documented for decades as a marker of storms carrying unusually heavy loads of water and ice. It downed trees onto a house in New Hampshire, blocked a stretch of Interstate 91, sent a tree crashing through an occupied camper trailer at Lake Bomoseen, and blew a window in on a sleeping couple in Shoreham, Vermont, all without producing a single reported injury, an outcome directly tied to how seriously the region's residents and emergency officials treated the warnings issued roughly 12 hours in advance. At almost the exact same time, a comparably dangerous storm system tracked across central and eastern Montana, with wind gusts up to 80 miles per hour and hail as large as 2.5 inches, while a historic flash flood threat gripped Texas and Arizona, and Canadian wildfire smoke blanketed the upper Midwest, all connected to the same slow, wavy jet stream pattern that has been repeatedly funneling one storm system after another through the same corridors all summer. Forecasters are already watching for the next wave to move through the same stretch of the country within days. We are going to keep tracking this pattern as it develops, sourced the same way we did today, straight from the National Weather Service, the Storm Prediction Center, and local meteorologists actually on the ground, reporting what they are seeing, not recycled headlines, dressed up as breaking news. Subscribe so you do not miss it when the next watch gets issued, because based on what we just walked through, it likely will not take long. And leave that comment below. Tell me if a storm like this has rolled through your area this summer and what the sky actually looked like when it did. Because behind every one of these radar images is a couple in Shoreham picking glass out of their arms in the middle of the night. A family of campers sleeping upright in their car instead of their tent because they took a watch seriously, and a lineman somewhere in St. Johnsbury who has been working since before sunrise just to get the lights back on. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.